So I'd like to welcome everyone to Building More Sustainable Cities Through Resilient Operations. My name's Caleb Stratton. I'm the Assistant Business Administrator for the City of Hoboken and the Chief Resiliency Officer.
And I am Jennifer Gonzalez. I'm the Director of Environmental Services for the City of Hoboken and also our Chief Sustainability Officer.
So today we're going to talk about how Jen and my roles are impacted by weather events, and more specifically talking about some of the experiences we've gone through. But before we get into that, you want to tell us a little bit about Hoboken, where we are, what we're doing, what our operations are like?
Sure. So Hoboken is located right along the East Coast. We are in New Jersey, right between the Lincoln and the Holland tunnels, across from Midtown Manhattan. We are the fourth most densely populated city in the United States, and that gives us a really interesting perspective. We have a 1 square mile city that is really vulnerable to two different types of flooding. Flooding from rainfall events like Irene, like Henri, like Ida, also from coastal surge events like Sandy, which just devastated the city of Hoboken.
So to put that in perspective, 70% of the city's in floodplain, and in a population of 60,000 people, our density of risk is more than that of Houston or New York City. And in terms of just ratables, I think that there's $2 billion of assets under management by the National Flood Insurance Program, and that's spread over like 9,000 policies. So I think Hoboken might be the most flood-impacted community in New Jersey, or the second most flood-impacted community in New Jersey.
So the city of Hoboken is basically structured like a bathtub. Our eastern coast is higher, and our western side of the city is much lower. Some parts of the city are maybe a foot or two above sea level. So we see a lot of our flooding in our lowest lying areas. And that's southwest Hoboken, that's northwest Hoboken, dense residential areas. And so what we see during these intense rainfall events, and let's define intense rainfall event, right?
Yeah.
An intense rainfall event for the city of Hoboken is a rain where we get more than 0.8 inches of rain per hour. And that is an event that, you could have rain for 24 hours, but if it's not that intensity, the city of Hoboken won't see any flooding in low-lying areas. Yeah. We'll flood in low-lying areas. We'll get sewer backups into basements. We'll get ponding on streets when we see that heavy, intense rainfall.
You've talked about the different areas of flooding. How does our sewer system operate?
So we have a combined sewer system in Hoboken. That means that your rainfall and your sanitary water, your sewage, go into the same pipes. And that can be a really big issue when you have sewer backups that are not just rainfall, but they're also sewage. So about 4 times a month in the city, when we have intense rainfall, we will have combined sewer overflows, meaning that our outfalls on the Hudson River overflow. And that's a mixture of rainfall and sewage overflowing into the Hudson River and also backing up onto our streets, into people's basements. So our whole goal is to mitigate that flooding and to reduce the number of combined sewer overflow events from about 4 per month to 4 per year.
Yeah. So to summarize this point, we have a sewer system that was built 100 years ago that doesn't have the capacity to convey or manage rainfall,
right?
Because it was designed to handle like a 2-year storm event, and then the outfalls where that would naturally gravity flow to is below high tide now.
Yep.
So we have a constrained system that's functionally obsolete, managing our rainwater. So when we start to talk about, the density of risk, the antiquated nature of our infrastructure, as well as how we're projecting out climate impacts, I think the reason why we're here talking today is to talk about what the projects we're working on. So can you talk about some of, going back to really how you got into green infrastructure and some of the projects you've worked on behalf of the city?
Yeah, so the city of Hoboken has been looking at mitigating rainfall flood risk for a very long time, since probably before Superstorm Sandy in about 2010, 2011. And we worked to develop this plan that basically identified areas within the city of Hoboken where we would implement green infrastructure to delay stormwater from entering our combined sewer system. And so we identified resiliency parks. We identified green roofs. We identified right-of-way green infrastructure.
Right.
And this was all pre-Sandy.
This was all under Don Zimmer too, right?
Exactly.
So
this was past administration.
Mayor, we had good leadership. And the question was, can we build in this environment in a way that provides more than one benefit and addresses more than one issue? And that was really the Parks' defense. That was like the genesis of the green infrastructure strategic plan.
And when we had identified all of these parks, they were identified through a community planning process. And, our residents, our neighbors told us they wanted these parks, but it was at the time when Sandy and Irene had impacted the city where we said, why can't we use parks for more? And so Parks' defense was born out of a critical need to mitigate risk.
Right.
And now we have
the 4-part water management strategy. So,
exactly.
We've kind of covered 2 parts of this strategy were in development preceding these impactful storm events. The first being discharge, which is, our pumping stations, H1, H5, we're under construction for H6 right now, which are, if you think about sewer sheds in terms of acreage, like think about pumping like 100 acres worth of water. We're talking about massive 50 million gallon per day pumps, redundancy, backup generators. It's essentially what dewatered the city after Sandy, Irene, Ida, Henri. So discharge being one of the 4 parts of our water management strategy. Jen also talked about delay,
the delay, right?
Which is using green infrastructure to capture stormwater before it enters our sewer system. So that's surface parks, stormwater bump outs, bioswales.
Exactly. That's all green infrastructure in the right of way, taking all of the roadways, the impervious cover that we have, and turning them into actual assets for stormwater management.
And can you just give an example of a project that we've done, whether it's City Hall or Washington Street?
Yeah. So Washington Street's a perfect example of a project that the city undertook, which had so many different benefits. It was initially envisioned as a complete streets redesign that we added 15 right-of-way bioswales into to manage stormwater.
That's like a soil with plantings in it?
A bioswale is a way to use nature to manage rainfall. And so it actually had the multi-purpose benefit of traffic calming, pedestrian safety. Right. We also upgraded the water mains in Washington Street. You added a conduit for microgrid in Washington Street.
Redundant power, we're trying that one.
Yeah.
And so the Washington Street and City Hall projects were, City Hall, we did downspout disconnects from the roof, so the roof leaders aren't going into the sewer system. We had rain gardens, bioswales, cisterns on site, porous concrete.
Yeah, and we did several other porous pavement parking lots as well. All of these green infrastructure strategies were meant to delay the stormwater from entering our system, store it in the system during the rainfall event, and discharge it actively via pumping. And a lot of that was done because, rainfall is one half of our equation, right? But the coastal flood mitigation is the other component of this, and that's resist.
We pulled $230 million from a program called Rebuild by Design into to the state of New Jersey to build seawalls, levees, gates to address those kind of shocks, those high intensity, low probability events, which reduce our flood risk in the city. And they took the green infrastructure strategies, the discharge strategies, and added storm sewer separation, which kind of falls under the delay strategy, which is basically taking our combined sewer overflow and separating it so it's just rainwater and sewer separate, and also adding storage. So so the idea that Parks' defense is like kind of surface green infrastructure, and then we have heavily engineered systems below ground that are set up at Block 12, 7th and Jackson, Northwest Resiliency Park. And we were able to achieve those because of the work on Washington Street and City Hall.
So we were able to open Southwest Park. It was a resiliency park in 2017.
So that was a $12 million project with how many thousand gallons?
About 200,000 gallons of stormwater is managed.
It's controlled by North Hudson Sewage Authority.
It's actually controlled by an opti sensor that automatically will release the stormwater into the system after the peak of the rain event.
Right.
So the really cool thing about all of our parks is that they're all connected. So they all have these smart opti sensors in them, which means that you can actually see in real time all of these parks tanks underneath them filling up after the storm. They're all releasing, and it helps us manage the amount of water that's actually in the storm system. We've seen a real significant, it's a qualitative benefit, of course, but a real significant benefit in how quickly the city can dewater after an event.
Right.
Think about how quickly we dewatered after Ida.
So we had
compared to Sandy.
So I think in Sandy we had like 3,000 damaged properties, and it took us 2 weeks to recover. And Ida, we had, I think, 300 damaged properties, and we were up and running 48 hours later. What we're realizing is what Jen's talking about in all the different parks is like we're starting to realize real benefits in mitigation changes and in time to recovery. So going back to shocks and stressors, like you always want to minimize exposure to risk and really improve your ability to bounce back. And, so getting into that, we've talked about discharge, delay. Let's talk about store a little more, because our most ambitious project is Northwest Park.
Yeah, and Northwest Park is...
We're terrible at naming things, by the way. It's all cardinal directions. We're working on that.
But you know how to get there. So,
yeah.
So the Northwest Park is going to be the City of Hoboken's largest park, right. 5.5 acres. And it's also going to be, to our knowledge, one of the largest resiliency parks in the country. It will delay 1 million gallons of stormwater from entering the combined sewer system during an event, but also it'll manage all of the stormwater falling onto the park site and all the adjacent roadways around the park site, which is also about up to 1 million gallons. And all of that will be managed through green infrastructure.
Right.
So together you're talking 2 million gallons of stormwater that can be managed in a park, not on our streets and not in our basements. This project, not only does it store stormwater, keeps that stormwater off the streets, keeps it from flooding our neighborhoods, but it does it in a way that improves physical resilience and social resilience. So it creates this kind of gathering space for our community that our community designed. They told us exactly what they wanted in this park. And they said, we want a soccer field, but we also want stormwater management. We want to see nature. We want to see rain gardens. We want to be able to walk through the city of Hoboken and feel like we're not in a city at all. So when you do projects like this, they pan out. The costs absolutely are just far surpassed by the benefits of these projects. And not just the ecological benefits, but the social benefits and just the monetary benefits from reduction in flood risk.
So let's talk a little bit about the fourth part of this water management strategy, which is the resist component. Resist is shorthand for seawalls, levees, gates, earthen berms, you name it. When we started doing the messaging, we didn't want to say we were building a wall in the community. And the reason why we didn't want to do that is because a wall implies some kind of separation. And in the vocabulary, recovering from Sandy, the only way to get out of flood risk is to elevate. And to do that, you kind of have to build higher. You have to build something to stop the water from coming in. And for us to do that, we had to go through a community-driven process, all these alternatives analysis. It was years to develop an alternative that worked, because we had the community come to us and they said, don't build in front of my building, don't build behind my building, don't leave me out, but don't build in my neighborhood. So those are impossible scenarios for us to design to. So we looked at the different reaches, a reach being like in water, waterfront, inland, and ultimately we arrived at an alignment that reduces flood risk for 85% of the community, and passes a benefit cost analysis, is approved by Federal Emergency Management Authority on behalf of the Army Corps of Engineers, helps us do a letter of map revision to reduce flood insurance rates in the community. And it's the fundamental part of our adaptation measures, which is building urban spaces that activate areas, doesn't separate the community from the waterfront, and does so through a number of different programs, materials, treatments. So do you want to talk a little bit about Harborside Park and kind of how we're embedding flood risk reduction into the park space there?
Yeah. So resist is actually two separate kind of areas in which we're basically using either natural elements or streetscape elements like benches and like seating areas to increase resilience and bring the entire elevation up, what, about 8 feet?
Anywhere, yeah.
Anywhere from 3 to
We're
8
trying
feet.
to get to 15 feet above sea level.
Yeah. So depending on the existing topography of the ground, we're trying to kind of elevate these two areas where Sandy inundated the city of Hoboken, and that's in the south at our terminal, and in the north at Weehawken Cove.
Yeah.
And Weehawken Cove is where we are going to construct the Cove Park, which will be our first parks as defense against coastal flooding. And thanks to the state and the federal government for that project, they are investing in a resiliency park that will have no visible flood mitigation features. However, it's basically a large berm. Under that berm is a sliding gate. That berm creates the elevation to keep floodwaters out of Hoboken. And that berm also provides recreation value.
Right. We're doing amphitheater on the water side. And then on the dry side, we're doing sport courts, basketball courts, play area.
Dog run.
Yeah.
And it all ties together in something that our community won't really notice as a flood mitigation measure, despite all of the educational signage.
Except for when it's deployed, right?
But that's exactly it. So the times in which it's deployed, it will become this major asset to our community that they didn't know they needed 364 days of the year.
Right. So what we're talking about is building a piece of infrastructure that's disguised. We call it for Bluebird Days. Mm-hmm. So 364 days a year, this is going to look like an urban amenity.
And a park.
So what the Rebuild by Design team did, and actually the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, they looked at this as like, how can we take the function of this feature and apply form to this piece of infrastructure to build something that's elegant, and elegance being you're not walking through the community and looking at like a flood risk reduction measure. You're looking at a piece of art or infrastructure or landscaping. And they did that by applying all these different finishes to the project that we're really excited about. But so to wrap this up on this specific piece, the resist element is an outgrowth of the successes we've had with our other projects, but it's also all four parts of the water management practice coalesce around this piece of infrastructure, which is reducing the most amount of risk. So storm surges being a different risk profile than our rainfall flood events. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, the pumps discharging, the green infrastructure delaying, the parks storing water, and resist coming together to prevent storm surge creates a comprehensive water management strategy that takes us from where we are now to like where we need to be in the future. And I'm really excited about those projects. Can you describe just how we get our energy right now and some of the things we've done to adapt that system with PSE&G?
Sure. So the City of Hoboken has a utility, PSE&G, Public Service Electric and Gas. They provide the energy via the utility to the city. However, you can actually procure your energy from other suppliers. So from a sustainability perspective, the City of Hoboken is actually offering our residents the opportunity to purchase energy from other third-party suppliers that are providing more renewable energy than the utility. It's kind of unrelated to our resiliency efforts, but just an interesting point to highlight. It's all about how sustainability and resiliency are linked, right? We're providing multiple different suppliers, increased renewable energy. That reduces our greenhouse gas emissions, and that makes Hoboken contribute less to climate change, therein requiring less of these adaptation efforts.
And we did the same thing for our municipal operations?
Yeah, we purchase 100% renewable electricity for our municipal operations. We have a climate action plan, and that's based on a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We're actually about to update that plan in the next few years and see how all of these efforts that we've been working on, from adaptation to mitigation, anything in the energy sphere, to things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, have contributed to the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions for our community and our municipal operations.
So we've talked about, the city's vulnerabilities. We've talked a little bit about the projects that we're working on to adapt to them. Let's talk about, like, what is your day like? What are your what's going on with your team? If you want to just describe what your responsibilities are and how this stuff jams up all of your folks that are out in the field working.
Yeah, so the City of Hoboken has Department of Environmental Services that's responsible for parks, public property, sanitation, road repair, snow removal, and all of that includes emergency response. Emergency response in our parks, on our roads, at our public property. And so our personnel are responsible for making sure that the city is prepared on a daily basis. We do that by every day going out and clearing any debris that's above an inlet that would otherwise be transporting stormwater. Let's talk to our partners about making sure that all of our resiliency investments that we've talked about so far are operating properly, they're well maintained, and they're ready to function.
So that's like testing generators, making sure that there's Wi-Fi for the Opti valve, that there's not existing water in the tanks that's going to impact how much they're able to accommodate, all those kind of things.
Yeah, and it's the sewer authority making sure the pumps are working. There's it's us, frankly, making sure that all of the inlets are cleaned out and that in our rain gardens, they are replanted every spring and they're functioning and performing their stormwater management feature.
So what else do you guys have to do for staging, because DPW is in the floodplain?
We are. So we use a variety of forecasting tools, including Tomorrow.io, to understand our potential risk to any particular storm event. So if we do see a storm event that's projected for significantly intense rainfall or coastal flooding, which we also use a coastal flood advisory system for, then we will potentially make preparations for relocating some of our equipment, relocating some of our personnel, relocating some of our storage. It all depends on what the forecast is.
For those of you that aren't as familiar with Hoboken, Washington Street is like a mile of our downtown district. It has a bus route that goes into New York City. It's connected to our subway station, which is the Path. And for us to relocate DPW operations, Jen moves bulldozers, trucks, people, personnel.
I don't. Our personnel do.
Washington Street. We have to post no parking. We lose revenue for doing that.
Yep.
So it's extraordinarily impactful and disruptive for us to have to do that, which we do frequently.
Yeah. Well, we do it when we do it with the best available forecast, the best available science, and that's really what it comes down to: is using the tools at your disposal to make the best decisions that you can in the moment. And so we have a great team of our emergency management coordinator, our police, our fire, our public works personnel, of course. And we work together to collectively determine what are the best operations that we're going to need to undertake for that particular storm event.
Or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We have a very, it's tough because we don't want to cry wolf. And we literally have to manage our communications on these different issues, because if we preemptively are too conservative, we lose credibility with our community. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, if we are so passive and not proactive in how we respond, the consequences can be grave.
Yeah.
I mean, the Ida, there was more than 30 deaths in the New York region from rainfall-related flooding. With Sandy, I think that there was more than 50 all told after that storm. So,
but none in Hoboken.
None in Hoboken, and that's part of finding, exploring partnerships like that with Tomorrow.
It's been accurate, and it's helped with things like, for example, snow removal, knowing exactly when we're going to need to mobilize so that we can most effectively plan out shifts that, don't tire our employees out, but get the job done, right?
So our existing conditions are kind of, we follow what Tomorrow's predicting. And so that's precipitation duration, precipitation onset.
Wind speeds, temperature.
Really the focus being for those those indicators are that we're able to know when to mobilize equipment and personnel, and then we're also can create an expectation of when the event might be over so that we can work on recovery.
Right.
And I just want to say that, we also are using NOAA tools, National Weather Service, Stevens Institute tidal gauges. We're trying to create a profile of information that corroborates what tomorrow is predicting, and we want to reconcile if there's inconsistencies between those two things, because they're both valuable tools for us. And I think that the reason why we're trying to have this new partnership that we're here talking about this is adapting our infrastructure, has consequences, but inaction on our parts also have consequences. So Ravi Bala, Mayor Bala, wants us to be the best. He's pushing us to innovate, to be transparent with the public, to put information out there. What I would say, and like you probably have some different lessons learned on this, what can other cities take away from this conversation really is, we've talked about our operations, we've talked about our preparations, our adaptation, but what have you learned from, kind of working with tomorrow, or how has it impacted some of the other things you're trying to test out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly making us think about how we incorporate technology into our operations. There are tools that we have at our disposal that we need to become higher and better users of. We're starting to think about how we incorporate technology into our concern reporting and allowing our residents better ways to report any complaints or issues that they have, so we can get notified of them immediately and address them quickly, move on, right? That's what we want. We want to keep quality of life, and we want to keep our residents safe.
What are some things that if there's another peer city sitting across the table from us, what are you looking forward to? What are you excited about? And what are some points of interest you want to take away?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about how technology is the future, and how our work with technology will just benefit the quality of life for our residents. But I think one of the big lessons learned that we have over the past almost decade that we've been doing this, whether I was here as a consultant, is building that community support for every project that we do, because the community sees, understands, and wants all the benefits that are being provided by that project. And that really requires strong leadership too. Former Mayor Zimmer, current Mayor Bala have been 100% aligned simply on climate change and adaptation mitigation efforts are our highest priority, and infrastructure investment to protect our residents from the effects of climate change are of utmost importance. That's why we have a climate action plan. That's why we have Rebuild by Design and a 4-part comprehensive water management strategy. And with the strong leadership from above and the strong support of our community, we can absolutely work together to get it done.
Yeah, and I think that I would add some of the special sauce is layering purpose, form, and function. So many of our projects that we work on and our successes, we haven't been successful across the board, but what we're able to do is to present really the secondary benefits and the obvious, most compelling need. So like, to use the resist element, flood risk reduction for the city means that we can maintain a stable tax base. It means that we have the opportunity to continue to build and develop with a known uncertain future. Mm-hmm. So by us taking action on reducing flood risk, that was the most critical path. But we sold that to the community through the form and the function of it delivering service on those blue sky days. So resiliency in the form of our flood risk projects are something that performs, but also something that functions to create what I think is placemaking in an urban environment. So you don't just have a system that's delivering a service and creating kind of unused or mono-use corridors. Yeah. So we've reached the end. I just want, for all those folks who are still listening, thank you for sticking with us. We appreciate your time. We hope it's been valuable. I'm Caleb Stratton with the City of Hoboken, and this is
Jennifer Gonzalez with the City of Hoboken.
And we appreciate your time and the opportunity to talk about the projects we're working on. Thank you guys very much.